Cellulose is one of the plant carbohydrates that we as humans can't break down, so it passes through our system as fiber. If you remember, cellulose is what makes up the cell wall in plants. However, some animals have adapted ways to digest cellulose and extract energy from it. An example of some animals that can do this are the ruminants, which are herbivores that usually have cloven feet. They have a special four-chambered stomach and chew a cud, which is a piece of food that is regurgitated and chewed again after spending some time digesting in the stomach. So let's look at the process of digestion in ruminants. First, they chew the plant material with their large flat teeth. When they swallow, the food enters the first chamber of their stomach, which is known as the rumen. It contains special enzymes and bacteria that can digest cellulose. Once that food has been partially digested, they regurgitate it back into the mouth and chew it again, further breaking it down. Then they swallow that regurgitated food, or the cud. Now that it is even more broken down, it's easier for the enzymes and bacteria to access all parts of the plant cells and break down the cellulose. Now pause and answer this question about ruminants. But not all herbivores are ruminants. Some herbivores have other adaptations to digest cellulose. Many herbivores, and some omnivores, have an expanded projection of the digestive tract called the cecum. In humans, the cecum is very small, but in some other animals, like horses, rodents, rabbits, and koalas, it's much larger. The cecum is a little nursery for beneficial bacteria that help digest and break down cellulose. The cecum is present in all mammals, but it's much smaller in carnivores and most omnivores. The koala's cecum is extremely long, up to 2 meters, but in humans it's just a very small projection. Attached to the cecum is the appendix. We still don't know the function of the appendix. It used to be considered vestigial, or not having a function, in modern humans. But many scientists now believe it does have a function. One theory is that, like the cecum, it houses beneficial bacteria. However, the appendix also has an unusually high number of white blood cells, so some scientists think it may be involved in the immune system. Mammals aren't the only ones who have evolved ways to digest cellulose. Many insects have as well. Termites eat dead wood, which is primarily made up of cellulose. Most animals wouldn't be able to digest it at all, but termites produce special enzymes called cellulases in their gut that helps them break down cellulose. Again, all of our organ systems are interconnected. They communicate and influence each other. Because the digestive system is providing energy and nutrients to our cells, digestion can have a major impact on overall body function. The level of sugar in our blood can impact our brain function and mood. For example, if you don't eat before class, you may have more trouble paying attention, or you may do more poorly on an exam. Take a look at this graph. The dotted lines show times throughout the day that judges were eating in between deciding whether or not to grant people parole. The y-axis shows the percentage of times the judges granted parole. You can see that early in the day, the chance of judges granting parole was above 60%, but that dropped quickly until the first meal break at that first dotted line. After that meal break, judges were again more likely to grant parole. But again, that dropped off steeply until the second meal break. So it seems that how hungry a judge is making a big difference in the decisions they are making. We saw this diagram before when we talked about positive and negative feedback loops. The feeling of fullness is regulated by negative feedback loops. But this process can vary a lot person to person. Some people have genetic mutations that cause them not to feel full, or not to feel full as quickly as other people. We are wired to overeat because our bodies evolved to deal with scarcity. Early on in our history, we couldn't just drop through the McDonald's drive-thru, so high-calorie food was hard to come by. However, in modern society, most people have the opposite problem. We have easy access to high-calorie food, but nutritious foods are harder to come by. Many people in the United States and all over the world live in food deserts, which are areas with limited access to affordable and nutritious food. There may be places to get fast food or highly processed food, but few options to get things like fresh produce. Access to healthy, nutritious food is a major health problem, particularly in low-income and rural areas. These areas are less likely to have grocery stores, forcing people to get their food from places like convenience stores or fast food restaurants. Relying on the high-processed, high-calorie foods can lead to obesity, nutritional deficiencies, and other health problems. Take a look at this map of West Virginia food deserts. Areas in blue have the least access to good quality food. These areas have low access to transportation and are more than 20 miles from the nearest grocery store. So you can imagine it would be very difficult to eat a healthy diet if you live in those areas, especially if you don't have a car. Look at the map of income on the left and the map of food deserts on the right. Do you see any overlap between places with the lowest incomes, which are in red on the left, and the lowest access to grocery stores in blue on the right? Low-income areas are more likely to be food deserts because grocery stores have less incentive to open up shop there. But for the same reason, very rural areas can also become food deserts. Now pause and answer this question. And this is not an insignificant problem. Obesity is one of the greatest health concerns in the United States because it is linked to many serious health issues. Here in the US, nearly 40% of adults are considered obese, and that percentage has risen over time. Obesity increases the risk of death by increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. If we look worldwide, more than 2 billion people out of the 7.5 billion on the planet are considered obese, and obesity causes 4 million deaths every year. This rate has increased 3 times since 1975, so the problem is growing ever larger. Normally, whether or not someone is obese is determined by the body mass index, or BMI. However, it's important to note that BMI is not a perfect measure of someone's overall health and whether they are overweight. BMI is just a ratio of height and weight, so it gives us a general idea, but doesn't take into account things like muscle mass or fat distribution. Very muscular people may have a high BMI, but very low body fat. One of the major risks associated with obesity is type 2 diabetes. Diabetes is a condition where blood sugar levels are not adequately regulated. If you remember, we talked about blood sugar regulation when we talked about negative feedback loops. Blood sugar is brought down in the negative feedback loop by releasing insulin, which is produced in the pancreas. There are 2 types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is usually genetic. In this type, the pancreas does not secrete enough insulin to reduce sugar levels. However, type 2 diabetes usually develops as a result of blood sugar levels being chronically too high. In 90% of cases, it is caused by overeating or eating too much sugar. So how does having high blood sugar lead to type 2 diabetes? Well, when blood sugar gets too high, it triggers the pancreas to secrete more insulin. But as cells adjust to that high level of insulin, they become less sensitive to it. So to bring the blood sugar down, the pancreas secretes even more insulin. Over time, the cells of the pancreas start to wear out and don't secrete insulin as well. At this point, the person has developed type 2 diabetes. And here's our last question for participation assignment 10.